Hello. Tonight I will be showing you how to recreate a stop motion drawing within After Effects. What we'll be making will look similar to this example video that I prepared earlier. I'll show you how to recreate this drawing on effect using trim paths, and I'll show you how to recreate this rotating earth drawing using the Scribble Effect and the auto trace function built into After Effects. So, that being said, let's get started. Let's start by making a new comp. We'll keep the default settings and the duration. This is about long enough as I want it to be to get a few full rotations of that earth drawing. Go ahead and press OK. Now that we have the comp ready, let's go ahead and add the background in so we have something to work against. Press Ctrl I to bring up the import file dialog. I'm going to use this image that I downloaded earlier, which is a picture of some lined paper, which I thought would be fitting since we're going to be simulating a drawing effect. Go ahead and line this up and then lock it so I don't accidentally click on it, move it around while I'm working. Now that's done, we can go ahead and start working on the animated text. The way I did it in the example video was that I actually hand wrote that text using a tablet in Illustrator, and then I imported it into After Effects. Now I already have Illustrator open, so let's go ahead and make a new file in here. And of course, the size of the file doesn't have to be the same size as the After Effects comp, because since this is a vector file, it can be scaled arbitrarily after the fact. So I'll go ahead and press OK. Now I can use the pencil tool within Illustrator to use with the stylus, and then I can begin writing. So I'll begin with I'll make the text. Since I have the number 1 in here, I'll go ahead and make the text in this document say Earth is number 1. So go ahead and start with the Earth. Now this is something you have to watch out for. If I were to bring the cursor close to this path that I've already selected, that little X disappears. And if I were to start drawing next to it, Illustrator would start interpolating between those two paths. And in some cases, it would actually connect them. And that's not what we want. With these kind of letters, we want each path to be separate because these letters are made up of different parts. So what we're going to do is press V, click somewhere else on the document, press N to bring back up that pencil tool, and then keep drawing. Now, since the cursor is far enough away with this selected, we can continue drawing. We only need to deselect the current selection if the two objects are close enough together. So, I will draw this out. Alright, now let me just center these a bit and scale them up, because this is the way it's going to appear when I import it into After Effects. So I'm going to save this, I'm going to call it text. I'll go pop back over to After Effects and then import it. Now I want to import it as footage, because if I imported it as a composition, it would take the layers within this vector file and put them into its own pre-composition and then create a folder with all of those layers in there. But since there's only one layer in the file that has all the paths, that would be kind of pointless. So I'll just import it as footage. And I can drag it right over onto the comp and then put it over in the corner. And it's already at a good enough size that I didn't want to keep it there. I don't have to scale it or anything. Now, the trim paths effect can't actually be applied to vector layers. They can only be applied to shape layers. Now, fortunately, there is a function within After Effects to convert vector layers into shapes. And we do that by right-clicking on it and go to Create Shapes from Vector Layer. It's already created these text outlines from that vector layer, and it's hidden that vector layer, and we don't actually need that vector layer anymore, so I'll go ahead and delete it. Now I'm going to increase the stroke size on this to about 8. Now one thing I want to fix right now are these jagged edges, right, you see around here. And that's just the default way that After Effects makes strokes. And that's not the way that handwriting actually looks. It's more rounded, more fluid. And we can actually fix that by going into the contents. Now, one thing to notice, each of these groups is a path within the vector file. And the way that After Effects imports this is that it imports them in reverse order. So this last group right here is actually the first path that I drew, and the first group is the last path that I drew. That doesn't actually change the way that it's going to be animated. We have full control over that. It's just a quirk about the way After Effects imports things that I wanted to make mention of. Now, the thing that we want to change is that we want to go into the stroke of this, and we want to change the line cap and join to both be rounded to get rid of those jagged edges. And we want to do that for each of these groups. And the way that we can do that really quickly is we can select each group by shift selecting them, expanding each of them, and then selecting the stroke sub options within each of those, which I know may seem kind of tedious, but trust me, it's a lot more tedious to actually go into each individual stroke attribute and change the cap and join options for each of those. And this goes by much, much quicker. So now that we have each of those selected, we'll drop down this, and then we'll select round and round for both of them, and it will apply them to all of the paths at once, and that saves us a lot of time. So now these are actually ready to be animated. So I'll go ahead and close the contents, and we'll go over to this Add dialog and click it, and we'll go to Trim Paths and add it. And the way that the trim paths work is that we have two ways that we can have the paths be drawn on, simultaneously or individually. If I were to animate them simultaneously, obviously, all the paths would be drawn on at the same time. Of course, unless you have a million hands, that's not the way handwriting works. So, what we're going to do is change that over to individually. Then I'm going to put this start attribute all the way to 100. Because if I were to animate it from 0 to 100, it would look like it was being erased instead of drawn on. So we're going to set this to 100, set a keyframe, go forward to about 115, add another keyframe, and bring it down to 0. So if I were to play through that, it looks like it's being drawn on. Fantastic. Now, there are a few other things that we're going to add to this to make it look a little more like pen, like it's being drawn on with pen. And if I were to go over to this example video, you can see right here the edges are kind of jagged. And we can achieve that effect using an effect in the here called Roughen Edges. So we'll go ahead and drag that over to this. And now, it looks kind of blotchy right now, but we can adjust the scale of this. So we'll go ahead and bring the border down to about 3. Actually, maybe 5 will do it. And that looks a little blotchy, doesn't it? Kind of simulates the way that pen ink leaches into the paper after it's been drawn. And that's what this effect is meant to achieve. We can also go into the evolution options and animate the random seed so that with each frame it'll look different. So it'll look like it's wiggling about like it does in this, and kind of like that effect you get in the old MTV cartoons like Beavis and Butthead. And the way we do that is that we put an expression on the random seed. We actually use a wiggle expression. So go ahead and alt-click on the stopwatch to bring up the expression dialog, and I'm actually going to be using a custom version of the wiggle expression that I discovered. And there, I'm just going to have to go and copy that really quick. And the way that this variation on the wiggle expression works is that the normal wiggle expression kind of is a little too fluid, a little too irregular for the type of animation that we want to achieve with this particular example. We want it to look more juddery, more jerky, and have a bit more regularity to it, and that's what this variation does. So if I were to bring that up, I'm not really much of a JavaScript guy, but I do know that it kind of linearizes this wiggle effect using math round. Now the FPS and amount are still kind of the same thing, the FPS of course being how many times per second that the wiggle will be applied to the attribute, and the amount is of course the amount that it's going to be wiggled. I want this to be about 10, and we'll make the amount about 8. So if I were to let that play through, you can see that it looks like it's wiggling, which is really, really cool. Now, that's just for the drawn on effect. Now, what we can do is if we go back to the example video again, you can see that it's also jumping around a very, very tiny amount. And that's because in actual stop motion animation, the piece of paper or the object isn't actually always going to be in the same place from shot to shot. And that's what this effect is meant to emulate, like the drawing on the paper is in a different location with each shot, like it's been moved around. And that's done using this same expression, but applying it to a different effect. And what first effect we're going to use is something called turbulent displace. Now when I first apply it, it's going to be really displaced. But we can change that, bring that down about 1 or 2, maybe 3. And then we can also change the scale, because if the scale is too high, even if I change the amount even if I animate the random seed, you're not going to see it because it won't be perceptible. So I'm going to have to change the scale down to about 5 to make it visible at this amount. And then I'll go ahead and alt-click this and put that same expression on that. So if we were to look through that, let that play through. Going through here, let's see, not enough. Let's bring up that scale. Now the turbulent displace is a little imperceptible at this scale. It's really just more for that realism. To get the more overall juddery effect, we would put the expression on the transform nodes, specifically the position and the rotation. We'll start with the position, and we'll also put it on the rotation. But for the rotation, we'll want to change the amount because it's measured, I believe, in this, yes, it's measured in degrees. So we don't want it to rotate randomly at 8 degrees. That's too much. We want it to rotate very, very slightly. So we'll put that at about 0.25 degrees. So if we were to do a quick RAM preview to see how that looks, it judders around quite a bit. Now we can reduce that by going in here, bringing that down to we'll have this amount, so it doesn't jerk around that much. So we'll do another RAM preview. And it looks like it is juddering around. Really neat. So that's pretty good. That's at a place where I can leave it for now. So next we'll go ahead and work on the rotating Earth, and that's a little more complicated. To do that, we're going to need to use another image that I downloaded. We're going to need to use this equirectangular map of the surface of the Earth that I found. We need to use an equirectangular map because we're going to be mapping it to a sphere, but not an actual 3D sphere. We're actually going to be using an effect within After Effects called CC Sphere to warp this image to make it look like it's been wrapped to a 3D sphere. So I'll go ahead and put the image into the comp, and then I'll add CC Sphere to it. As you can see, it churned that image into a pseudosphere. And I say a pseudosphere because it's not actually within 3D space. It's actually just a 2D rendering on a 2D plane of a 3D object. And we're going to be using the auto trace feature on this. And how the auto trace feature works is that it takes certain key elements within this picture, certain highlights, and then it creates masks around them for each frame that I specify. Now, if I were to apply the auto trace to this right now, not only would it try to apply the auto trace to the wrong region, which is the white region, we want it to apply to the land masses, not the oceans, but it would also freak out because of this gradation, because of the shading. Now, the first thing first we'll get rid of this shading, and to do that, we'll go into the shading tab and bump up the ambient to its maximum volume, so it's completely two color and no gradations anywhere. Now this is actually ready, almost ready to be traced. the thing that we want to change next is we want to put some rotation on it. So at the first frame, we'll put a keyframe at the first frame, go all the way to the last frame, over here at 8 seconds. And we'll want to make it rotate a couple times. And we can do that by doing this a couple times. And I've noticed we can just put a number up here and we'll rotate that number of times. But if I were to put a positive number in here, if you notice, it will rotate to the right. And if we want it to be physically accurate, we want to put a negative number in there because in the real world, the Earth rotates in the opposite direction. So if we were to scrub through here, you'll notice that the Earth is rotating in this direction. And it's rotating at a pretty good clip. I would say maybe 2 revolutions would be enough. That might be a little too fast. So now that that's animated, we can now go back to the first frame, go up to Layer, and do Auto Trace. Now we want it to go through the entire work area because if we just did the current frame, this is the only masks that we would get. And you also notice that it's putting masks around the white areas because I have the channel option set to luminance. Now if I were to select the inverse, it would essentially invert this after the fact. So what was now black would be white and what is now white would be black. So the land masses would then be in white. So if I were to preview that, the land masses would be traced out. I could also apply a channel invert to this layer, but this is a little more convenient. It saves me the trouble of adding that extra effect. So what I'm going to do is let the auto trace run because it's going to take a minute to think, and I will pause the video while it's doing that, and then I'll unpause it when it's done. Alright, auto trace is done, and as you can see, we have all of the land masses filled in with white with transparency, rotating, and that's exactly what we want. Now I actually had to go back and apply the channel invert effect to it because when I just used the invert option box within the auto trace function, this is what I got. I got these white borders, and it's an interesting effect, but it's not personally what I was going for. So I guess if you wanted to do this in the future, you would really want to apply that channel invert effect. So I'll go ahead and make this visible again, and now we're going to apply the Scribble Effect. And this is the reason why we needed to use the auto trace, because the Scribble Effect can only be applied to masks the same way the trim paths can only be applied to shapes. So we'll go ahead and drag the scribble onto this layer. You can't see it right now because it's in white, and it needs to set the scribble to apply to all masks using modes, not all masks, because if I applied to all masks, you'd be able to see behind it. Like right there, you get some errors. If I apply it to all masks using modes, then all of those masks would be hidden as it rotates. And already, it's looking pretty good. So one thing we can change is we can go into the stroke width and bump that down, and also go into the spacing and bump that down as well to make it more dense. Maybe bring up the stroke just a bit more to make it a bit more bold. Now what we're going to do is we're going to animate this being drawn on the same way that the text is animated, and that we actually use the same kind of attributes here. So we'll go ahead and bring up the end all the way to 0, and then we'll go to 115, which is the same frame that this animation ends, and we'll put it at 100. So both the earth and the text will be finished drawn in at the same time. And you'll notice that as it's being drawn in, the earth, it's kind of drawing in unevenly, but that's because of the way that the masks are ordered within this layer. And of course, if I show you, there are a lot of masks, and it would take forever to try and reorganize them. So for all intents and purposes, it looks good enough. So I think we can get away with that. So what we're going to do now that the effect has been drawn on, what we're going to do is add a quick outline to the earth, just because we don't want it to just be land masses floating in space. So we're going to go to a frame where I can see everything, where it's fully drawn on. Put a ellipse right near the center, holding Control and Shift. Bump that up. Make that about 5. And now what we can do here is we can actually go down to the text outlines and take these two effects, copy them, and apply them to this shape. Well, one thing we might change right here is we might bring down the border on the roughen edges, make it look a bit better. And I think I might actually do that on this one too. We'll also go into the transform node and add those expressions to the position. Go into the transform node and add those expressions from this layer to this one. Of course, making sure to make that the rotation one is 0.25 and this one is 0.8. Well, I mean, 4. So if we were to look at this, the Earth, the outline is juddering too. And you'll also notice that the scribble is also got a wiggle applied to it, and that's just because of the way the scribble works. It's already set to 10 wiggles per second, and we could put an expression on the random seed, but it wouldn't make any difference. It would look the same regardless. So let's go ahead and add these same expressions to the position and rotation for this. Press P to bring up the position, and then we can press R to bring up the rotation. Change that to 0.25, and now everything is jumping around a bit. And we are almost done. There's one last effect that we want to apply to this, and that is Posterized Time. And what the Posterized Time will do is it will make it seem less smooth in its animation, because if I were to play it back, you can see that this is rotating very smoothly. And to fit in with the stop motion effect, we want it to look a bit more jerky and shuddery like the motion of everything else, and we can do that by posterizing the time on that. And the posterized time works the way the posterized time works, it drops some frames during the animation. It essentially reduces the frame rate for that layer to something other than the composition frame rate, because the composition frame rate is at 29.97. So let's drop this down to about 20. Let's copy that and apply it to this layer 2 and the text outlines. So if we were to do another RAM preview of the and see the way that it gets animated, let that play through for a couple seconds. We'll go up to about 3 seconds. You can see already it looks much less smooth and a lot more juddery, which is fantastic for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve here. Now, the only thing left to do is to animate all of the drawings being drawn on and drawn off, and also add the drawn on for this. So we'll add a trim paths to this circle, to this ellipse, and it will have the same type of animation as with the text and the earth. They will all be drawn on at the same time. So we'll go to the, let's say, 7 seconds, 7:10, and we'll add another keyframe there, go down to the end, and then complete that so it's gone. Go to this, we'll go to our effects, our scribble, and animate that again. put a keyframe here and a keyframe here, and then same thing with the text outlines. We'll do a keyframe here and a keyframe here. So at the end, now you'll see that some of these, you can still see parts of the art, but that's because of the posterized time, because of the way that it works. We can still, by the time that the video is over, these will be gone. But because of the mismatch of the frames per second, we're going to still see some art by the time that the film is over. So let's do a very quick RAM preview. You see everything is drawn on. It's jerking around a bit. And it will look the same way at the end. I guess one last thing we can add, just to add to that realism, is to animate the background. What we can do on the background is we're going ahead and unlock it, bring up its position, put in that same expression as before. We'll make it wiggle around 10 frames per second. By amount of 8, I'm going to make it more here. And also animate the rotation. Make that 10.25. As you can see, it's already way too much, and by the time we change that, it'll be good. That's looking pretty good. And there's one other thing that we're going to add to this, and that's a wiggle effect on the hue, on the saturation. So we'll go over to the layer, the effect, apply it to this. Go to color correction, hue, saturation. What we're going to do is we're going to put a wiggle on the lightness. Because the way that stop animation works is that the light, also same thing with like the position not being the same from frame to frame, the lighting might not be the same from frame to frame, and this is what this effect is going to emulate. So what we're going to do is, oh dear, I do believe, let's see if I can animate the on. I don't want it to. Let's try to get that back to about a bluish color. That works. So now we can colorize the lightness. We can put a wiggle on the lightness. We'll make that about 10, and we'll make, is 50 enough? Oh, 50 is too much. We'll bring that down to about 5. Oh, that's great. Awesome. Alright, one last thing we can do. We can put a darken on this, and on this, and on this. Make it blend in a bit more. And then we'll add a new solid to the top. Make sure it's a black solid. Make it the comp size. Add a elliptic mask. Invert it. And put a little feather on there to get a quick and easy vignette. Expand it out just a little bit and reduce the opacity. And there we have it. All ready to be rendered out, which I will now do really quick, and I'll bring that up as soon as it is rendered. And there you have it, the final animation. Looking pretty good if I do say so myself. So, to recap, the things we learned today is how to draw vector paths within Illustrator and import them into After Effects and make them appear to be drawn on. Be able to use the Live Trace tool in conjunction with the CC Sphere function to create a realistic looking rotating Earth, and then use the Scribble function to make it look like it's been drawn on, and then use a special After Effects expression to make everything wiggle around to make it appear to be stop motion. So, this has been Ryan Lotmenier giving you a quick tutorial on how to create a stop motion drawing in After Effects. Thank you for watching.